Now, I am delighted to be talking to Leonora Langley this morning as we are halfway through the Eating Disorder Week. Good morning, Leonora.
Well, good morning, Samantha. Lovely to connect again.
Isn't it just? It certainly is. Now, Eating Disorder Week, yes. Now, this is quite a topic, isn't it?
It is. It's a devastatingly complex issue, and one that can potentially steal childhood, as I say, devastate early relationships and tear families apart. I think it's important to clarify what an eating disorder is.
Yes.
And it does stem from, it's a serious mental health issue where eating, exercise and body weight or shape become an unhealthy preoccupation and obsession in someone's life.
And what sort of age group does it suffer with this mainly?
It's interesting. 1 in 50 people in the UK is affected by eating disorders, including bulimia, binge eating, avoidant restrictive food intake, and anorexia, which actually has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. But it mainly affects young people between the ages of 12 and 25.
Why do you think it hits on those then, as young as that?
Well, I think that going through adolescence is much more challenging than we ever realise. Apparently it affects females more than males, but it's not determined by sex and can affect all genders, races and ethnic groups. I think when young people are finding themselves, finding their own life soul journey, that they need to have autonomy and independence. And sometimes parents are resistant to that. They sort of want to hold on to them as children and try and almost break their wills in some cases. And I think that eating provides young people with an opportunity to take control of their lives, where sometimes they don't have control.
Do you think parents have something to do with this? You know, parents aren't particularly healthy eaters or whatever. Do you think this might have some, effect on the children?
I certainly do. Sometimes when parents can't express love itself, then they will express it from the way that they feed their children. And young people tend to suffer. They present with a perfectionist personality, sort of low self-esteem, and have difficulty communicating negative emotions and an ability to resolve conflict. They're the 4 main things that young people present with. And I think it's a result of emotional pain which might have been unexpressed, repressed or suppressed earlier on in their lives.
We need to heal relationships, do we not, between caregivers and children?
Definitely. That's so important. There's so much pressure on parents, especially since COVID, to be a good parent, to be a good enough parent. I think we've all taken to binge eating a little bit, or let's get the next piece of cake because we think it's going to console us. But of course it doesn't. It does the opposite. I think binging in particular is often linked with a human being's yearning for love. It's sort of reverting to the oral gratification of babyhood in search of the unconditional love that they never received. So, in the absence of the real thing, they will seek love from a bar of chocolate or a tub of ice cream, both of which contained mood-altering substances such as theobromine, which is not good for us at all. So it's a sort of a counterfeit love source, and we have to realise that a bar of chocolate, tub of ice cream cannot love us. It never could and it never will. So we have to learn to love ourselves and seek that source of love within.
Now, of course, quite often this is referred to comfort eating, isn't it? When to make you just feel better at that time, but in fact it has a negative effect. Now, what about diet in relation to hyperactivity in children?
Yes, that's an interesting subject. It's not quite on the eating disorder spectrum, but it's very important that we try to avoid hyperactivity in our young. A lot of young people tend to skip breakfast can result in their blood sugar being abnormally low, and of course this affects brain function. So when they do eat, they have a tendency to consume too much junk food, including sweet, sticky foods, chocolate, chips, and caffeine-laden soft drinks. So these types of foods can affect sleep and cause behavioural problems. I think we need to try and encourage young people to eat 3 balanced meals a day. Diet rich in natural organic foods, plenty of green vegetables and fresh fruit, rather than refined ingredients, particularly sugar and white flour. I think by doing this, that their minds would be more alert and they would be able to deal with their emotions more effectively.
Well, yes, especially if in a stable family environment.
Yes, that is such an almost alien concept now. What is stability in a family? There are so many permutations on what a family is now. I'm sure that all parents consciously would not want to harm their children in any way, but it's the unconscious stuff that tends to do the harm. So it is a really complex subject, and one that we really do need to deal with. Apparently, the charity BEAT, which has set up this Eating Disorders Awareness Week, their mission is obviously to end the pain and suffering caused by eating disorders. And this year, it's focusing on a campaign for UK medical schools to implement comprehensive training on eating disorders. Because I think that doctors have so much to learn, but I do think that nutrition and what can result in eating disorders is vitally important to their training.
Now, social media, I think, has a lot to blame for this. Putting young people under pressure, you know, they all like to put up their nice photographs, perhaps they're on the beach, you know, they're looking good and all that sort of thing. And then there's some people that, you know, perhaps can't go away on the holiday or whatever. And of course, that doesn't help them one bit, does it?
No, obviously, social media is not responsible for eating disorders, I would say, but it can play a significant place in putting undue pressure on young people, I think, to meet a certain social and cultural idea of beauty. This places a high value on their body image and weight, and it's tied in with their self-worth. So I think we need to help young people to move away from outside influences and help them to develop internal resources. So basically less internet and more inner net to develop their inner validation.
I mean,
their self-belief and self-respect.
I mean, I quite agree with what you're saying, but it's very hard because they do get addicted, don't they, to be looking up, you know, a supermodel or whatever.
Absolutely. And apparently people in those professions like modelling, jockeys, athletes are more prone to eating disorders because they have to reach a level of almost perfection to do their job. So that's an added pressure for a lot of people. But it's interesting with anorexia, which actually is an overwhelming phobia. It's a compelling fear that drives a person to severely restrict their food intake to a dangerous degree. But that's basically about a false body image. It's a sort of dysmorphia where a person believes they're overweight when they're not.
Yes.
And I think it stems from over-control in early childhood, the need to break the child's will by a parent who is critical of their weight, eating habits or body shape.
Yes.
I do think that young people respond by a need to control their own lives. That's so innate within a young person. It's a strong desire to have control over something when they feel they otherwise have no control over anything. So it's a coping mechanism, I think, Samantha. By restricting their food intake, it provides a sense of security, structure and order that young people find reassuring.
Now, Leonora, just tell me quickly, how can you spot, perhaps if your child, you've got a few concerns, but what are you sort of looking for?
Interesting question. Obviously, a loss of weight, perhaps fussy eating, not eating 3 meals a day, obviously rushing to the toilet in the case of bulimia. But the trouble is, young people are really good at hiding their problems and will appear almost normal to a parent. So it takes a lot of detective work, really, and awareness on the part of the parent to work out what's going on.
It's difficult. I mean, it can, really make a big upset within the family when you've got a member who's struggling with that.
Oh, I've spoken to people who've worked with people who have eating disorders, and they say the job is so demanding and so upsetting when the person is absolutely rigid and determined not to eat, especially in the case of anorexia, which I think is the most serious eating disorder and the one that can lead to death. It's a really tragic scenario, the anorexic one.
And where do you think people could go for help with this?
Well, I do think that this wonderful eating disorders awareness charity is a very good starting point. You can get their number online. It's called BEAT. It's existed since 1989 under a different name, but it became BEAT in more recent years. And they're doing amazing work. Obviously, you can get referred to help with the eating disorders from your GP. There's a lot more out there than there used to be. And there are clinics, of course, which people can attend on a longer-term basis to help them through what basically is a nightmare.
I'm sure. Leonora, thank you so much for talking to us today about this. It is a very sad thing to happen within a family and to the individual. So, but thank you, as I say, explaining a few things to us. And
it's a pleasure. I just believe at the core of it all, we need to encourage in our children, they have a choice between love over fear. And if we can encourage them on the love route, then we're doing well.
I quite agree. Thank you, Leonora. Take care.